With that final conclusion of that episode of the Fear playthrough, let's get into the review, the exciting part that I've been wanting to dive into. So the system I made, and we'll go over here shortly, is not anything crazy. I've just kind of done a little bit of research on like what makes a game great, and especially in my opinion, and created a like 20-point graded tier system. 5 categories, 20 points each. So we'll find out what the end score is for Fear, um, based on my grading system. Now the thing too is that Fear has been around forever. It's a great game. Everyone knows it. This honestly is more of like a pilot episode of my reviews, because it's kind of hard to argue that if this game is terrible or not. I mean, it is one of the greatest games, in my opinion, of all time. And so what I really want to break down is, we'll go through the 5 categories. We'll have gameplay and mechanics. We'll have the story and atmosphere, and sound design and music, and visual levels and design, and the I guess the replay value, like replayability. And I'll have all of these over here on this side, popping down one by one. So and we'll go over each one together and kind of break it down. It's gonna be fun. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Why you feel that way? Why there's something I might have missed? Because again, this is my experience with the game, my observation, the way I experienced it, and this is coming from an MMO player of close to 30 years now. So it's a completely different dynamic. But without further ado, let's get down to the weeds into it, and let's start with the first category. All right, so for the first category, we have gameplay and mechanics. Now, to break down what this category means specifically for Fear, so it's probably going to shift depending on the game, but when I was playing this game, I'm looking for how does the gunplay feel, and like the recoil, the responsiveness, and this particular subset category was kind of difficult for me to hone in on, because again, Fear is an old game. The games have improved drastically to have that smoothness flushed out, have completely different upgraded integrated systems. So I took into account current day games and the past. So I kind of looking at back then, how does that game hold up, and does this game still hold up in present day? Which doesn't matter as much if it doesn't, because again, it's got an age to it. But if it does, that's huge. So it's definitely something I took into account. Something unique about Fear that I also wanted to include in this category was the enemy AI, which we'll get into that as well. And then we have like the controls and smoothness. How does everything feel? Can I flick the wrist, flick around a corner, or how does the movement feel? The controls, and then the last subset is like the variety of combat encounters. Which I guess kind of ties into replayability. Again, it was really hard to create these categories. I was trying to avoid repetitiveness. So I guess you could say that, the repetitive aspect could definitely fall in suit. So, now I've given you guys all the subset categories of at least the first category for gameplay and mechanics. Let's dive into it. The whole entire time through this video, I'm going to have, gameplay kind of just filtering in and out of the video so you can have a nice little feel. I'm not going to play the audio just because it'd be a lot of noise going on. I'm gonna have my mic on my recording going off too, so I'll have a little music in the background. Just sit back and enjoy. Little Subway Surfer in the upper left corner, me yapping, and some content in the middle. But so yeah, gun responsiveness. Overall, it was pretty good. My only complaint, you might see a couple times in here or on the episodes if you go and watch them on YouTube, is that in a high octane like combat situation where I'm just trying to get some shots off to buy me some time to reload. Often, more times than not, the gun would continue firing after I've clicked, and it could be just a nuance that is associated with Fear itself. But it was just something that was kind of I took note of. It's definitely not something that I would appreciate in particular, because I feel as though if I'm gonna have to deal with shooting nonstop and high octane environments, I don't want to waste any ammo. I mean, there were a lot of times where I definitely was, in a pinch when it came to ammo, and I got frustrated a little bit because, I spam shooting. The enemy AI would already be dead, and my gun would fire a few shots off after that. So definitely something that I was not a huge fan of, but again, overall, it was still pretty smooth, pretty fleshed out. And then, let's talk in the enemy AI. This is something that I really want to get into. That also is a part of the one of the sections later for interesting facts, but the enemy AI and F.E.A.R is something else. It is actually, I dove a lot into this, and it's really cool on how they integrated this into the game. The enemy AI works in a way to where they can flank you. If you're retreating, they know that they need to charge you. They can hear if you're reloading, and they also know that that's a rushable moment. They actually have intelligent call outs to each other. That was something that was really cool to observe. Overall, the enemy AI was actually relatively difficult to deal with. And that's something that, is pretty prevalent in games of this age. We can all say back then games definitely were a lot more challenging, and you can definitely see it in this game, especially with the enemy AI and the difficulty that it presented. That was really, really fun to try to overcome. So, yeah. And, I learned quickly that there's when you came into a huge room and there was a bunch of enemy AI coming around and whatnot, I had to approach it very carefully. So that was something that I had to take into account here, is that if there was multiple enemy AIs in the room, that I couldn't just come in and bum rush unless I had a full stack of slow-mo. Otherwise, I'm gonna be in a pinch. You can't just come in and expect to mollywop everyone with no defense, no cover round. The actual movement to the game felt really, really smooth too. I thought it was really cool how you could do the lean around the corner and whatnot. And F.E.A.R offered, probably, I don't know if it's one of the first, but it definitely encouraged melee combat, which if you watch my gameplay, I don't do at all. I am not the greatest at FPS games whatsoever. I will not claim to be ever. I'll practice, but I will never say I'm an expert in that category. And the melee was really, really interesting because it offered, these one-shot metrics where you could just go up and whack someone, and you'd already be clearing out the room as you speak, as long as you got a good knife kill to associate with, right? So yeah, overall, I think the strongest point to this category was the enemy AI in the game, with it being ahead of its time, how difficult it was to deal with. It truly was something that I can't stress enough that, it's something that you would see in current day games. It's a great system that they created. So because of that, for gameplay mechanics, I'm going to give it 18 points. I feel like that's a good number to go off of, especially, starting out strong first category. So for my next one, we're going to go over story and atmosphere. I am a huge lore buff for World of Warcraft, so this is something that, I really want to carry a heavy, grading system for any future games that I play. I think that story and music are the key to what makes a great game, because you want to establish immersion and almost like a parasocial relationship with the gamer as they progress through this game. If they're not able to connect with your characters, if they're not able to listen to this music that connects with them in an environment that's beyond the game itself, then I feel like you're failing as a game dev. But yeah, so F.E.A.R's story was interesting. I had a lot of copium and nostalgic from my childhood of, I know this is a great game, and I know it's a scary game. I played this game when I was, maybe 12-ish years old. So, I just remember staying up late at night and not being able to sleep that night because I was that petrified. But playing through the game, I realized that wasn't as quite scary. And for a lot of things, for starting early on, it just simply didn't make sense. There was a lot of, I wouldn't say jump scares, just psychological jumps that, was weird, but I didn't understand what it meant. And the reason that my gameplay was so long is because I took the time to listen to every single phone call, computer. I was really trying my hardest to understand the lore in its entirety. So the first half came out really, really weak. A lot of misplaced components, but then the last couple of chapters of this game, it came in super strong. I mean, I absolutely, like, 10 out of 10, amazing story. It wrapped everything up, all these pieces that you had in your brain floating around that I know these are a thing, I don't understand why we need to know them. The last few chapters said, yeah, so here's what happened. You are a part of this. Now you have to make a decision on whether or not you want to execute the villain you've been chasing this whole entire time. There's the whole background with Alma being your mother and everything. It was a huge story drop that just jaw dropping, really. I mean, it was great. It definitely started out really weak with how chronological it was. There was a few things, like whatever happened to Jankowski. I was the biggest Jankowski hater, but I read online that you don't find out in the first F.E.A.R. I don't know if you find out in the second one. I didn't want to spoil too much if I ever end up playing F.E.A.R. 2. So all I looked up was, did I miss something in F.E.A.R. 1? They said, no, it's not really mentioned, just that you can't find them. So, and that I'm fine with that. But the story did have a lot of similarities, funny enough, to Stranger Things. You had kind of like a Vecna approach with like an 11 character, and so it was really interesting to see that. And then you have characters like Norton Maples, where they just hit the mark on what an IT guy typically is, in terms of like a meme format. And it's just funny that it was almost synonymous to how Queso looks and acts. Again, it's just like this game was ahead of its time, and gunplay and story mode and story integration, it was really good, really good. Like I said, the horror elements, I'm sure at the release of the game, probably were something that was groundbreaking, that definitely scared people. But I feel like because of current day horror game categories, and because it's in such a huge boom because of how viral it is and how much people just are digesting horror games, it just doesn't hold up. And it's not its fault, right? It's just the current state of horror games have completely increased the standard of what's considered scary in a horror game. So I'm sure at the time F.E.A.R. was a scary game, at least it was for me as a kid. But looking back at it now, playing through, I was like, I really don't understand what's going on, and this is like creepy, but it is what it is. But again, the last few chapters were amazing story-wise. I mean, it wrapped everything up perfectly. And because of that, I'm going to give the story and atmosphere category 18 points. Our next category is the sound design and music. So like I mentioned before, to me, this is a huge part of what makes a game great. Coming from a World of Warcraft player that has an amazing soundtrack to almost every expansion, to playing a ton of horror games that I feel like the sound is what really does you in for immersion. This is something that I heavily value and look for in a game. But sadly with F.E.A.R, I feel like it just did not hit the mark when it came to sound. This is probably the one category that hurt the most. I couldn't connect with it. There was little to no sound, and if there was a sound, it was during a cinematic. It just really, there was no ambient sound in the background that really kind of laid out the scene for me. If we're talking like, cinematic SFX, it was really good. It came to explosions and whatnot, but the immersion of the sound really wasn't there for me. You would have like a soundbite drop of when there was like a creepy encounter throughout the game. There was a couple times where I heard the sound drop and I wasn't looking in the exact spot where I wanted me to look, and I actually missed the encounter. So that was a little infuriating to deal with. I don't really know how you can get around that per se, because especially doing playthroughs, I'm exploring every aspect of the game, so I'm not necessarily going to be looking in the direction that most gamers should. But I was expecting some like I don't say groundbreaking, but just something that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, where you could be in like an office space and its lights are pitch black, and you still are scared because the ominous, like the ambient sound is just creeping into your head, but it just wasn't there. I will say though, give credit where it's due. The voice acting was really, really good in this game. And that's something that I also wouldn't say take value in what makes the game great, but I definitely appreciate it because, with the integration of AI into games, you're seeing a lot of AI voice models being integrated. And it's really a struggle to get good voice acting in a game. When there's good voice acting, that's a good sign. So I really liked the voice acting of, I think it was Peter Lurie. I forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, but he voiced Paxton Patel, and that was probably the best voice acting in the game. I mean, as a villain going throughout the game, it was bone chilling every time that he appeared in the game talking to you. It was great. You don't find voice acting like that nowadays. It's kind of difficult to find, but with that being said, with the sound design and music category, I give it 12 points. Okay, now we're going into the fourth category. It actually is visual and level design. So when it comes to this category, something that I take into account is how are the aesthetics of the game? How are the layouts? Is anything hard to find? How does the detail go into the game that looks really great? Or are they just pulling, some type of publicly known model or setting that a bunch of programmers or game devs use for their games? Which, given how old it is, that's something that you're not going to find. Today is kind of common, especially with horror games, to reuse the same resources, which is nothing against it. It just means that, it's a lack of creativity. So, again, with F.E.A.R, I'll open up with, the positives. The chronological order of the level design was amazing. How you progressed through the office space, going all the way to the abandoned building, all the way to the center where you're going to confront Alma and Paxton Patel. You felt like you were challenging obstacles as you progress through the game. That's really, really good to have in a game. And the level designs, each level felt unique. There was just a huge amount of detail. Like, I loved going into these desks on the office space levels and just seeing the little magazines, the detail going into the laptops, the phone messages. It was really good. And like I said earlier, when it came to graphics, current day, obviously, F.E.A.R is not really gonna hold up in detail to present day graphics. However, F.E.A.R is in the horror game category. So with that being said, right, there are a lot of great horror games that have their own unique flair to graphics that aren't groundbreaking, but it adds a certain sort of niche to their category. So, I wouldn't say this was a metric that hurt F.E.A.R when I graded the game for the review. Everything felt smooth. The layouts felt easy to find. The only caveat I had, even though we had a flashlight with one of the best cooldowns that I've ever experienced in a game, there were a lot of scenes that were simply just dark for the sake of being dark, and it was really frustrating not to see anything. And I get that's not for everything. I get there were a couple scenes where they had to be dark because they had a psychological jump scare coming from like Alma or something like that, or you have a flashlight in your crawl space. I get that, but there are some outside or in a open area that was just simply dark for being dark, and that when it came to lighting and everything, I wasn't really a huge fan of that. But still, the environmental detail was great. My favorite thing playing the game was if you shot like a pillar or a wall where an enemy AI was, you had like a cloud of smoke that came up from the point you shot. I thought that was awesome, and it actually obstructed your field of view. So it was really cool that they went in and included that little detail in a game this old. It's just crazy to me. So with that being said, I gave visual and level design an 18. So 18 points for visual and level design. the final grading category, which is the replay value and overall experience. This essentially just means, like, can you revisit this game and replay it uh, pretty easily, and not get burnt out. And, that's kind of hard. That's what a lot of games nowadays struggle to achieve. So I would say this is probably one of the hardest categories. Um, I think the only genre of current games that succeed in that are probably like, the streamer based, Lethal Company, Lockdown Protocol type games and simulation games are pretty repeatable. But there are a lot of games that struggle with burnout and losing their player base because of that. I know MMOs struggle with that since the dawn of time. But, with F.E.A.R, the replayability was there. And it's because everything that came together of what makes a game great is what made F.E.A.R great. You can come back into F.E.A.R and you can play this game over and over again because the gunplay feels super smooth. The enemy AI is just as challenging. I mean, the difficulty to this game was a really, really good medium where you wouldn't get bored and you wouldn't feel like the game is too difficult for you to accomplish, but you still had to approach everything cautiously. And, that could be just be coming from me who, is not really an FPS player. So it's something that I'm not the best at. But the other thing, too, for replayability is that there's still a community for this game in present day. If you take the time to pull up the Steam page, I would use it for this video, but I don't want to, pull up personal information of personal games and whatnot. But if you pull up the Steam community page for F.E.A.R, you can see just a ton of screenshots of F.E.A.R 2, of the monsters they see, of Norton Mapes. The community just, they love making memes, they love joking. So it's definitely there. And then if you were to look for speedrunning, there is actually a whole speedrunning community for F.E.A.R too. I mean, I think the going record for beating the first F.E.A.R is 32 minutes, which is actually insane. I really don't want to shift my content into speedrunning, but it's definitely something that like I wouldn't mind trying for like a stream. I don't know if I'd make like a full-on challenge video series or something. That's something that people want to see, sure, but I'm not really an FPS player, so we probably have to get over that hump first, right? But yeah, it's a big reason why this game just it's great. It really wraps everything up in a nice little package, and 20 years later it still holds up. I mean, that's a huge thing to me. Is, I'm not always going to be playing old games and reviewing them. I just start out with F.E.A.R because it's a safe game for me. This is a pilot episode of me figuring out, okay, for my reviews, what is it exactly that I like, that I want to add. I'm still figuring out video editing and all this stuff, so it was a safe game for me. But I'm not always going to be doing old games like this. And the fact that this game is so old and I still feel like I could pick this game up, in an hour and play it probably till like midnight, because it's just that easy to mindlessly just go through and just find a new gun, and shoot around, try new challenges. And it could also be me being biased, the fact that I grew up with this game. It's one of the many games that I stayed up late playing with my brother, so it brings back a lot of memories of us as kids. That's definitely a very fair likelihood. But everyone I've talked to, especially coworkers saying, hey, I'm doing a playthrough of F.E.A.R, I'm going to do a review. They're like, oh, dude, F.E.A.R is amazing. And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's pretty great. So, I mean, it's definitely a common opinion that, F.E.A.R is a good game, and it's for a reason, and I'm hoping that all of these categories sum up why this game is that good. If there are any categories that you feel like I missed or that something I should cover or gloss over, hopefully we can find those topics that you think I missed covered as like a subset category in one of the 5 categories that I have. But yeah, I think, with having said that, the fact that it's held up for this long, for replayability, I'm gonna give it 20 points. If you haven't already done the math, I'm going to unveil the total score for F.E.A.R, my first playthrough, first review, whole 9 yards. I'm going to give it an 86, which is surprising. It really is surprising because, I wouldn't say I'm really a critic in anything except for World of Warcraft. So it's kind of interesting that the system I created, it'd be a lot higher, I feel like, for F.E.A.R, because it's a great game. It's been around for a very long time, still holds up, active community, replayable. And I tried really hard, but to give it the points where it's due. But I think, like I said, the one category that I think really hurt its overall score was the sound, and it could have just been an issue of, you know, its time period, that like sound in a game wasn't really that prioritized maybe. But you know, who am I to say? Because I mean, I think it was roughly released around the same time as World of Warcraft, and their original soundtrack was absolutely amazing. So not really sure where the lapse in that is. You know, it's not like I turned the music off. I made sure that I was experiencing the game as if I was picking it up for the first time. So, you know, don't let the score be indicative of, like, you know, Fear being any less than the legendary game that it is. You know, it created waves in the horror game community, especially horror FPS games, you know. And it just goes to show that a game as beautiful and legendary as Fear got an 86 as a, you know, as a B plus. So I'm really curious to see moving forward what games get, you know, the A plus, A minus range with my grading system. It'd be interesting to compare the two, because that's why I wanted to create a grading system that was pretty detail oriented, because, you know, I don't want to go off the feels or the vibes and be like, it wouldn't be a genuine review, you know. So I wanted to really lay out everything that I could. And like I said, you know, like this, hopefully this is as, you know, fine grained. And if you don't agree with this score, leave a comment as to why you think it should be more, what category. You know, maybe I did miss something in the sound category. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm deaf. You know, it's very possible. Maybe the cinematic SFX deserves, you know, a few extra points in the sound category. I really you don't know, you know. And we still have, you know, future playthroughs to try, you know, like Fear 2, Fear 3. I might try the DLCs to see what they're about. I know there's like an online multiplayer as well and all that stuff and all that jazz and everything. There's an active community of Norton Maples memes, and, you know, still whatever happened to Jankowski, you know, is the age-old question. But yeah, you know, this was my first review that I put on my YouTube channel. It's something that, you know, I've realized that I'm really excited about. I know it's a growing process to kind of get a following, to get a feedback, you know, to get people that support, you know, my reviews or go over or give me ideas and whatnot. You know, I use a lot of review YouTubers as inspiration, you know, like Rad Brad is great. I watch his content all the time. And it's just something that's like, playing games are great. When I stream, you know, I interact with my community and we have funny inside jokes and, you know, cracking laughs, picking out games. But building a review, it's like, you know, you feel like your time is being rewarded for a game because you're playing and you're deciding, okay, I finished this game. How much do we think this game is worth in terms of a ranking, right? So really excited to see what future games we have in store. I do have a few that I just got recently. They're gonna be much shorter reviews because I can already tell they're short horror burst games. I just, you know, I got Fear last year for Halloween, had it laying around, and I was like, you know what, I'm knock off Fear. I'm gonna make a playthrough out of it. It's gonna be fun. So I had a lot of fun playing Fear. Definitely would play again. I don't know anytime soon because I just have a long list of games ready to tackle. But if you have never played Fear, or, you know, been living under a rock, it is a great game to try. It is a game that, you know, again, established waves for the horror game genre. You know, like if you picked up SCP-5K, I'm sure Fear has influenced that game in some way or another, right? It's just, you know, it's a great game. And I would say, honestly, I don't know, it's a good thought. I was gonna think about, you know, what would be a good score of, like, don't play this game. I'd probably say like below 70. But honestly, we'd have to get to that point, you know. We'd have to find a game that's worth 70 and look at the categories and go from there. But that'd be my honest, you know, take on it. But now, you know, now that we've, you know, concluded with the final score, right? I want to go over some fun facts. This is something I want to add into each game if I can find fun facts. You know, like small dev studios, it's not going to be as prevalent, but Fear had a ton. Like I mentioned with the enemy AI, it was like the first of its time in a video game. So the fact of how difficult they were, that was something that just was new and unheard of, right? And I thought this was interesting as well too. The devs of Monolith, when they were designing F.E.A.R, they tried to get as close as they could to get the game similar to Matrix with its slow mode system. And obviously, you know, the game being released at its time, the slow mode system, the enemy AIs, it was groundbreaking integrations to have in a video game. The devs worked for 2 months to try to integrate a car chase scene with Paxton Fattel into the game, and they ultimately ended up scrapping the idea because they couldn't get it to work. You know, reading that, I think about the interactions we have with Paxton and being able to go outside of these building layouts that we have on a level and maybe even have control over the car. I don't know if that would be ideal. It'd probably have us in the back shooting or something, but still, that would have been really cool and interesting to see. I'm kind of sad that they ended up scrapping it because, you know, now I want to play that. So office layouts, whenever you guys are playing this game, because I highly recommend you do, pay attention to the cacti that they have on the desk. They're actually peyote cacti. This next fact, I'm not entirely sure how much truth holds to it. Apparently, the bathroom in the actual dev studio was believed to be haunted by the lead level designer John Mulkey, so much to the point that they swore they saw something and would not go into the bathroom while they were working on F.E.A.R as a game. My last fact is, you know, when you have those laptops that you see in game that have little lore drops, look at the logo next time. It actually has the Alienware logo. The devs made sure to include that as well. I gotta say, I had a lot of fun doing a playthrough and editing and creating my own review system. You know, maybe one day the review system will get polished from you guys and your critiques and your additions to the point to where it's something that actually holds a lot of weight on whether or not a game's good or not. You know, I think that's something that lacks a lot nowadays. You look at IGN or Gamer PC or whatever that website is, where they give reviews and it almost feels like they just get paid to say these like 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, and it, you know, or to dogpile on a game because the internet told them so. You know, you have all these, I don't know, it just doesn't feel genuine, and I want my review to be genuine. So really excited for future games. And you know, I wish I could tell you what I'm playing next, but I still haven't decided. I have a couple games, so just kind of, you know, keep an eye on my YouTube, see what playthroughs I have coming up. I also have some compilation videos from my stream with a few of my friends. I worked really hard video editing those videos with sound bites and memes. Hope y'all enjoyed the video, enjoyed the review. If you didn't, think it sucks, you think I suck, let me know in the comments how I can get better. That's ultimately what I want to do. More comfortable I get under the camera, maybe the less cornbally I sound, but we'll see. Without further ado, I'll be seeing you.